we're going to move on now, and I'll introduce our next speaker, Aric Chen, whom I've known for years, actually, and I first knew him as a journalist, and now he's a curator. And he is involved in this incredibly ambitious and exciting project to set up the M Plus Museum in Hong Kong. And personally, I would love to hear what Hong Kong can bring to the idea of a museum if you're starting from scratch. I should also probably draw your attention to that. I don't know if you saw that beautiful Twitter wall, tweet wall. What are we calling it? But do comment, critique, say nice things. And later on, we'll be able to see it all on the wall. But Aric, over to you. Tell us about M+.
Great. Well, thank you, Justin, and also thank you, Alice, and the students of DCRIT for inviting me here. It's really a pleasure. And although I have to say, if Emily was intimidated, I'm absolutely terrified to be speaking in front of such a high-caliber group of design critics, because as a museum curator, we're, of course, often the ones being criticized. But here I am. Have at me. I'm here to talk as Justin mentioned, about this project I'm working on. I'm a curator at M+, which is a new museum for visual culture being built in Hong Kong. There's a very famous saying from Deng Xiaoping when China began its sort of reform and opening up, as we say, that one should cross the river by feeling the stones. And in some ways, that is what we're doing. But to begin with, there's quite a bit of history behind M+, and certainly the broader cultural district that we're part of goes back about 15 years to 1998, and in fact, there was at one point a proposal, going back to the discussion earlier, to build a Guggenheim or Pompidou in Hong Kong. That did not happen, and instead, in 2006, about eight years ago, a museum advisory group was convened, and they sort of came up with a mission for the museum that, despite some tweaking and changes, minor changes since then, has remained roughly the same. And there, what you see is the sort of a part of the vision statement for M+, which goes, M+ is more than a museum or building, which is good because we won't have a building for about 3 or 4 years yet. It will be a new type of cultural institution focused on 20th and 21st century visual culture, broadly defined from a Hong Kong perspective, the perspective of now, and with a global vision. And this, of course, goes back to a lot of things I've discussed earlier, which I would be very interested in continuing at some point. But just a little more background. We are located on a landfill site, a reclaimed site that didn't exist about 15 years ago, right on Victoria Harbour. It's a very dramatic site overlooking the harbour towards that sort of iconic view of central Hong Kong with the HSBC building and Bank of China Tower and so on. Right now, there's not much on the site. But in the next few years, there will be. Construction has started on a Chinese opera house, one of about a dozen or more performing arts venues that will be part of the West Kowloon Cultural District. There will be a park, which will be roughly that sort of greenish area that you see to the left of what I've marked out as being the location of the M+ building, and also a high-speed rail terminus linking Hong Kong to the larger high-speed rail network in mainland China. I'm not going to go too much into our building, but we will have a building. It's designed by Herzog and de Meuron, the Swiss firm. The building is quite big. It's about 650,000 square feet, which, just to make it more concrete, is about the size of MoMA here in New York. It features a very slender tower on podium design with a very almost diaphanous tower, which you can see on the left, with a facade with the potential to project LED, moving image, and digital works. The horizontal slab that you see is roughly where most of the galleries will be, and all of it will be anchored to the site. on the sort of Airport Express train tunnel, which runs below where our museum will be. One of the strokes of genius that Herzog and Miriam came up with in their scheme was they took this tunnel that, again, runs below our site and was seen as a real obstacle and turned it into a real advantage by proposing that we excavate around this tunnel to create this so-called found space for large-scale exhibitions, installations, and events, and that's what we'll be doing within this ground floor sort of area that is very much meant to be public and open, to create this kind of civic space that Emily showed other examples of in other museums earlier. We are a museum for visual culture, and we sort of break that down into visual art, design architecture, which is the area that I sort of look after with my colleagues Shirley Surya and Jennifer Wang, and moving image. But importantly, it's not about sort of drawing boundaries between these disciplines, but also exploring the intersections, interactions, fluidities among them. And that's one of the things I think that's quite appropriate for a museum in our part of the world, because of course these disciplines are in large part Western constructs, and at a time when I think everyone is looking at exploring these cross-disciplinary discussions, we are opening in the part of the world where these disciplines have not traditionally been so defined and siloed. Now, the global vision from a Hong Kong perspective part. We are a museum rooted in our place in Hong Kong and in China and Asia, but our intention is to be a global museum from a Hong Kong perspective, not a museum of Hong Kong visual culture, let's say. And so we do look at the world from where we are, but importantly, we are still looking at the world and the fluidities and flows and interactions and links between different parts of the world as well. This is a very sort of a dumb, boxy diagram, as I call it. Perhaps a more accurate one would look more like this, because these are very complicated networks and that we are looking at that can be defined any number of ways, but always sort of placing where we are in that sort of dense core. But of course, any place could be there. It just happens to be that we are who we are, where we are. Now, in sort of looking at how we look at the world from where we are, we did a little bit of an exercise earlier this year when we mounted our first architecture exhibition at a space called Artistry in Hong Kong. It was a way of, first of all, showing our building and also the other schemes that had competed for it, but also to give a preview for how we're collecting architecture specifically. And how we are collecting architecture with this global vision from a Hong Kong perspective. And what we did was we showed about 100 works that we had acquired in our first year of collecting architecture, focused on post-war Hong Kong from the 60s through 80s, and the past 10 years of mainland China, this remarkable period of experimentation that has been going on in mainland China. Part of it is, there's often this question now of why do we collect. In our part of the world, because there are not many collections of the type that we're collecting, this is a role, a niche that we feel we ought to, and can fill in terms of recording, writing, constructing the narratives of design, architecture, and other disciplines in our part of the world, because those narratives have not been told to a wider public as much as they have been in the US or Europe, let's say. So having sort of focused on post-war Hong Kong and contemporary China, we also collected other things from other times and places that we show too, going back to some Frank Lloyd Wright working drawings for the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo from 1920, and also things like this Paul Rudolph drawing, this wonderful Paul Rudolph, and very hard to get Paul Rudolph drawing of the Wisma Dharmala Sakti Tower in Jakarta from the mid-80s. Just to sort of give you an example of using a name that I'm sure you're all familiar with here in New York, of course. The sort of common narrative is that Rudolph, very important American architect, who really was on top of the world, had his heyday in the 60s and 70s when he was designing the Yale School of Art and Architecture building, Boston City Hall, among other things, very dramatically fell out of favor by the late 1970s. His work was considered unfashionable. He was sort of taken down by Robert Venturi and the postmodernists, and soon thereafter his work in the US dried up, and he came to Southeast Asia, where he was quite active in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Indonesia. Now, rather than sort of looking at him as this architect who resorted to Asia past his prime, I think being where we are, we can look at this later phase of his career in a slightly different light, because first of all, these sort of postmodern debates that so harmed Rudolph were not so relevant to Asia at that time. And if we look at Rudolph's later work with these sort of unbiased eyes, without this sort of baggage of the discourse that was going on here, we can really see it as a very interesting evolution of his work into high-rise typologies that in many ways brought to fruition his ideas of urbanism in ways that he wasn't able to realize here in the US. At the same time, you can see in this building in particular, he was looking at vernacular Indonesian architecture. With its deep overhangs and recesses, as a kind of tropical modernism that was perhaps building in a different culture, building on in a different cultural context his earlier and famous Sarasota houses of the 1950s. So that's one way we can sort of look at the world differently, perhaps. Another example, a designer who we're very much interested in, a 20th century designer that we're very much interested in, would be Charlotte Perriand, who, of course, with Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret, designed this famous chaise longue in the late 1920s. This is something that Perriand is probably best known for. But we can, in recent years, with increasing scholarship and a deeper understanding of Perriand and her work, we know that in as early as the early 30s, she was already, while still subscribing to the machine age aesthetic of the Bauhaus, she was already looking at natural materials and artisanal crafts in design. And in 1940, she went to Japan at the invitation of the Ministry of Trade and Industry to work with Japanese industry to improve, let's say, Japanese design for export to the West. And there, in that photo, you see her in Tokyo with Junzo Sakakura, the important Japanese architect who also worked for Le Corbusier for a while. Now, during this time in Japan, she created in bamboo an evolution of that famous chaise longue, which you see on the left. And we could see how Japan really made an impression on her, and vice versa. She had a huge impact on the development of later post-war design in Japan. But this sort of this impression stayed with her throughout her life. 20 years later, that light stand you see on the right was something she designed for her own apartment when she was living in Rio de Janeiro in the early 60s, incorporating two of Isamu Noguchi's Akari lights. So this is sort of a development of the Charlotte Perriand narrative, but we can also ask, what happens if instead of focusing on the 1927 chaise longue, we actually bring to the front the kind of work that she was actually doing for most of her career. Always acknowledging, of course, and always accepting this chaise longue in the background. But are there other ways do we see Perriand in a different light? Taking this further, what happens when we actually put the post-war Japanese design, furniture in this case, in the foreground? How does the narrative change there? How do our understandings of all of them sort of change? I realize how this might look, and I have to say, I should be clear that what we're talking about is not any sort of revisionist project to sort of marginalize the Western canon. In fact, quite the opposite. It's a way of saying if we believe that certain genres, in this case post-war Japanese furniture, are worth looking at in their own right, then of course it's also important to bring into that discussion the other influences and dialogues that were happening that influenced it. So of course Charlotte Perriand would be very important to the narratives that we tell, again in this case of post-war Japanese design, and perhaps by looking at Perriand through post-war Japanese design, we can also have new and different understandings of her work as well. I bring this in because just to say that this, of course, is not limited to any sort of Asian perspective. Let's say Brazil, Latin America has come up earlier. I've been working on this little book on 20th century Brazilian design, and I think this is something that we can also apply to places like Brazil. I love this photo of Le Corbusier and Jeanneret and Perriand's Grand Confort chairs in the foreground from Brazil. With slinking in the background, you have Niemeyer's Rio chaise. And this is the way we've always sort of looked at modernism, let's say. But the question is always, what happens if we change our vantage point, if we change where we're standing to that back corner where the Niemeyer is, and looking towards the Grand Confort instead. How does that affect the way we talk about these things? Now, this is one way in which we're kind of revisiting, in a museum context, these kind of narratives of 20th century design. But these are there are many other stories too. I mean, we are in China, and China has a long tradition of its of things that for a long time were very separate from the discussions and debates that were going on in this part of the world. Many of my colleagues at M+ are looking very closely at ink art in particular, and the evolution of ink art to include the various practices and modes of abstraction, as well as even outsider ink art, as with the King of Kowloon doors that you see on the right from the 80s. So it was this guy who claimed to be the King of Kowloon and would go around the city writing these screeds to that effect. But in terms of ink art, can we, in this sort of multidisciplinary realm, also look at architecture and design? For example, the architecture of Wang Shu, the Chinese architect who won the Pritzker Prize a few years ago, his Shangshan campus in Hangzhou, the use of perspectival systems, the kind of meandering paths and the manipulation of both solid and interstitial spaces. These are all, in many ways, drawn from and tied to the Chinese landscape painting tradition in graphic design and posters. Calligraphy and typography is something that comes from a different tradition as well, and these are again narratives that we're trying to build. In a more contemporary vein, being a Hong Kong museum of visual culture, we recently made the decision to start acquiring neon signs. Hong Kong is very much a neon city, and for us, neon signs were a very compelling way of looking at visual culture, especially in Hong Kong. The first two that we've acquired, we didn't intend to create this sort of neon zoo, but are the sort of Sammy's Kitchen cow on the lower left, and the Kai Ki Mahjong parlor rooster, both from the mid to late 70s. But we decided to look into this a little bit more deeply, because we didn't want this to be sort of about nostalgia or sentimentality with neon signs, because they are very rapidly disappearing, being replaced by LEDs and so on. So we decided to launch our first online project, which was launched about 6 weeks ago. It's up until the end of June. Neonsigns.hk. Please check it out if you have the time and inclination. But we decided to use that medium to really explore neon signs from all these various angles, to flood the zone, maybe, as they used to say from my journalist days. And so we have slideshows, videos, essays, timelines, looking at neon from, as craft and industry. We have this fantastic video on the making of neon signs that's gotten almost 100,000 views on YouTube. The neon as a graphic mode as with these sort of neon sketches that you see. Neon as a cinematic device. Next week, we are releasing on the site a video interview with Christopher Doyle, the cinematographer for many of Wong Kar-wai's films, which are often, set in Hong Kong with this very neon, this sort of ambient neon lighting, and he talks about how that influences his work. Neon as an artistic medium in visual art and so on. At the same time, we have this crowdsourcing element, this neon map, for which, in an effort to identify the remaining neon signs in Hong Kong and find out more about them, we're inviting the public to post photos of their favorite signs and tell us what they know. In the sort of non-canonical realm, our existence has very much to do with, of course, the economic rise of our region over the past 50, 60 years. And that economic growth has been largely built on stuff, as Nicholson called it earlier. The sort of for us, I think looking at industrial design will be very much about looking at the sort of export booms throughout the region as it moved from Japan through Taiwan, Hong Kong in the 60s and 70s, Korea, and of course now mainland China, just across the border from us, especially in the Pearl River Delta region. What you see here are some plastic wares by this company called Red A that was originally founded in Shanghai, but in 1949, when the communists took over, moved to Hong Kong. And it's still around, still based in Hong Kong, still manufactures in Hong Kong. They started with toothbrushes, but over the years started making everything from these very iconic red butcher's lamps, which you still see all over Hong Kong, to one of my favorites, the sort of faux cut crystal glasses, and then the kind of what we would think of now as being retro lamps and so on and so forth. These are the kinds of things we're starting to look at, but of course we're not. It brings up questions because the traditional museum criteria of how you collect these things really don't apply. If you're talking about styles and movements and form and function or aesthetics or even material culture in many cases. And also authorship, and oftentimes we don't even know who made or much less designed some of these things. So these are areas that we're starting to look at, and actually this fall we'll be doing a workshop with scholars from around Asia who've been looking at these things, just to begin to try mapping out this massive industrial production that has really been the defining phenomenon of our region for the past 50 years, and also discussing the sort of methodological, critical kind of tools that we might use in looking at these things. And in a more propositional realm, I have to thank Paola Antonelli, who turned me on to this project by the London studio Cohen Van Balen. Last year, they, working with a dance choreographer, they designed a project whose sole purpose is to choreograph its own design. On an assembly line, and they actually went to Shenzhen to a factory there and had actually enacted this choreography that resulted in these objects being made. This, of course, has a lot to do with it's a commentary, of course, or a critique of the relationship between objects and labor and Taylorism, and so on and so forth. Things that are not unique to China, but certainly loom large there, here and now. In the realm of urbanism, as I said, we are living in a very, very, probably very historic time in China with this unprecedented urbanization and all the sort of problems, questions, and we hope solutions. that come along with it. We are collecting a lot of schemes that reflect upon this. On the top is a proposal from 2006 by MAD. Ma Yan-song is one of the principals of that firm, who you may have heard of, based in Beijing, who proposed different scenarios for Beijing in the year 2050, including turning Tiananmen Square into a park. On the lower row, Urbanus, the Shenzhen and Beijing-based firm, has been doing a lot of studies on these urban villages that are being swallowed up as Shenzhen grows. Many of you may know that Shenzhen, as the story goes, was a small fishing village of about 30,000 people 30 years ago. Now it's a city of about 12 million people. As it continues to grow, it is enveloping, engulfing these urban villages that are often home to migrant workers. And in these studies are looking very closely at the implications of that. And especially where we are, there is a movement towards greater integration of the cities in the Pearl River Delta region, which includes Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Macau, Zhuhai, Guangzhou, Dongguan, millions and millions and millions upon millions of people that are part of this absolutely unprecedented urban growth. And these are all issues that are very ripe for I think our museum to be looking at. And on that note, if I can just squeeze in one final plug. We have, speaking of research and how much you all love research, we've been very lucky that Design, Trust, and You nonprofit in Hong Kong has generously agreed to fund a research fellowship, ADAM Plus, for a researcher from anywhere in the world to come spend 3 to 6 months with us looking at design and architecture issues in the Pearl River Delta region. And that could mean within the Pearl River Delta region. It can also mean between the Pearl River Delta region and other parts of the world. So for any of you out there who are, these are for students who've graduated, so for any of you who are recent graduates or about to be graduates, we really hope you'll apply and come spend some time with us. Applications are due by the end of June. Next week we'll put the information on our website, but you can also email me personally. My email's there. And one final attempt to lure you to Hong Kong, a stunning night rendering of our future building, which will be completed at the end of 2017 on glorious Hong Kong Harbor. Thank you very much.